Still on Operation Dudula matters, the movement has recently been thrust into the spotlight over their campaigns, which are targeted at evicting illegal immigrants from informal trading spaces in the townships. However, questions around the legitimacy of the group have also been raised. And let me get to weigh in on this conversation. Angelo Fick, he is the Director of Research at the Auwal Soci-economic Research Institute, and protest law analyst Stanley Malemetja. Good evening to you both, and thank you for your time tonight. Angelo, let me begin with you. You know, it really feels like a race to the bottom in as far as these tensions that we're watching unfold before our eyes, and we see the presence of the police, but no clear sense that there is direction or even an ability to contain the situation should it get out of hand. And we've had a number of scares that it has the potential to flare up. How do we begin to make sense of what's happening, Angelo?
So I think, firstly, this is not our first go on this particular terrible roundabout. And you say that if it is a race to the bottom, as you put it, it's a very specific spiral race because things look very familiar if we start paying attention from 2005, 2008 onwards. The issues between South Africans and who live in South Africa, regardless of their status, has been building for a very long time. And part of the failures that we're seeing now, where communities are being asked to and sometimes take the law into their own hands, take up policing function, take up the idea of policing people's registration status, often with very little actual information. That's all the consequence of failures on the part of the state that includes the government and administration. Because so much of this could be avoided had there been, if we institute proper civic education to make people understand this and to remind people of the common humanity that we have and of the processes that should be in place and that should work when people have concerns around drug dens in their communities or criminal activity. And so there are police failures, there are administrative failures, but there are also larger failures in the state of how we talk about and how we think about ourselves and people from elsewhere in the world, and particularly people from elsewhere in Africa.
One of the concerns that has been expressed by South Africans is that the difficulties and, that they're facing in townships, especially when it comes to the operations of businesses that are owned by migrants, is that they are suffering the impact of the lack of economic opportunity available to South Africans. And they feel that their voices here are really not being heard. Are there different ways in which you think government can be responding to this moment, Angelo?
So there's supposed to be, all sorts of regulations about opening and starting a business that I think government failure indicates here. There are inspectorates. We know this. When people have their livelihoods taken away from them in the city centres and their goods removed because of bylaw applications, there are similar bylaws that apply in township spaces where the police are not quite as active and vociferous in their implementation. So there are all sorts of actions that the police can take. There are actions that local government can take. There are actions that national and provincial government officials have to be party to. This is, after all, the same, the same governing party that in the previous phases of these kinds of unease by South Africans indicated that they would address these problems through small business development stuff, and we haven't seen those really work themselves out. And I think it is very opportunistic of certain actors in the political space in South Africa to exploit these kinds of anxieties and tensions, project onto people that they identify or are identified as not South African as the source of these problems. We've seen this elsewhere in Africa before in previous waves. There's the Ghana must go phenomenon of Nigeria. There are similar kinds of phenomena elsewhere in the continent that we are simply replicating. Even as we say, we are exceptional from the rest of the continent. And so our governors in both the public and private sectors, I think, need to see this as a last-ditch emergency moment to intervene in ways they didn't properly intervene 2014, 2016, and now we're in 2022.
Stanley, South Africans have a right to express how they feel. They have a right to protest. But with every right, we're often told and educated around the Constitution that there's also a responsibility. So the expectations around how to handle those rights. What do you make of the current nature of these protests?
Thank you for that. You think, the current nature of this protest is that, number one, from the outright, if you look at what the members of the EFF were carrying, that on its own, it loses the protection of the Constitution, because Section 17 is very clear about the limitations that are placed on the right to peaceful assembly. And one of them is that when you do protest when you do gather, you should be unarmed. And also the regulations of the Gatherings Act also tells us that, when you are exercising your constitutional right to protest, you are not allowed to carry any weapon or any object that can be used as a weapon. And I think, we need to send a message to South Africans that when you are exercising your right to protest and you engage in conduct or do things that are not protected by the Constitution, you are actually delegitimizing your protest. And instead of us, or instead of the state focusing on the message, they actually focus on your conduct that is outside the Constitution. A simple lesson could be, if the EFF was really accompanying someone to go and open a case, a good way to demonstrate that will be carrying a pen. Just carry a pen and a paper and say, we are here to offer this victim a pen so that he can go and fill up the form at SEPS. So the question goes to, what is a panga, what is an assegai, what is a golf stick doing during a protest? And also on the side of law enforcement, I think this time we need to applaud them to how they dealt with the situation. But they could have leveraged more on the regulations of the Gatherings Act, which provides that if the police or the state receive information about a proposed gathering and they are of the view that the conveners did not follow the correct procedure, they have all the powers and the right to call that person to say, hold on, come here, come and give a notice so that we can know how many people will be at the protest, so that we can also know the duration of the protest. Now, when the police are there for the longest time and not knowing what is going to happen, they are actually gambling, because they are not actually being proactive, but they are reacting to the gatherers as and when they are at that place. And it's also important for the protesters to know that we have, a landmark constitutional court judgment, the Mlungwana judgment. What that judgment says, it just says that when you protest without giving a notice, it is not a criminal offense. However, the Constitutional Court did not exempt anyone from giving a notice. When you give a notice, you're actually protecting yourself as a participant of a protest and also protecting those around you, because once the state does not know how many people are involved in a protest, and once chaos erupts, it becomes very difficult to handle such a situation. So by all means, we do have a constitutional right to protest, but we do have some responsibilities, and a lot of responsibilities, if I can put it that way, because our constitution does not protect violent protests.
And that's really the biggest concern, because if we look at just some of the visuals that we've been showing on our screen, you've got people that are holding bottles almost as if, if anything happens, they're ready to break a bottle and be part of the attack. And there is just a rhetoric of violence that has followed the campaigning that we have seen here. How do you think that we can address that aspect of it?
I think that aspect, we can address it by, properly educating our people to say, look, if you are going to engage in a protest, first of all, you need to understand what message are you trying to put out there. What is the purpose of the protest? Where is the protest going to take place? How many people are going to be there? Then once we have all that information, we know that a protest is contained, and the state is able to focus on the main issue. Because right now, what the police were doing right there was not only monitoring the protest, it was actually trying to separate two rival groups. And that on its own, we cannot say that is protected by the Constitution, where you have one group that says, we are ready for you, and they are wielding weapons against the other group. Once a retaliation starts, people need to understand that they are no longer protected by the Constitution. And, we really need to be mindful about, the dangers and injuries that can occur during protests. South Africa is not a stranger to violent protest and police brutality. And people really need to think about that and also not try and make the job of law enforcement difficult. And we'd also remember that, during the June unrest, there was a report that was released by the state. And one shocking fact is that Gauteng only has one water cannon. And, so when they have one water cannon, now you ask yourself, does the police services have enough equipment to control the crowd in a constitutional manner, in a humane manner? Of course, you look at the number of people who are gathering and you look at the number of police. When police are outnumbered, the retaliation is not a favorable one. And people need to understand that you cannot go to a protest wielding a weapon. It is not a war. You are going there to exercise your right. There's a particular message that you are going to pass. Even if it's not a particular message, protest, you have the right to go and stand in solidarity with someone. But now, how do you go and stand in solidarity with the victim while you yourself, you are wielding a weapon? That's why I'm saying the lesson that maybe I can give today, what they could have just said is a pen and say, we are here to hand over a pen to the victim so that, he or she, the victim can easily fill up the form and lay their charge. But when you are wielding an asset guy, what are you actually saying?
Angelo, one of the things, of course, that is also problematic is that the nature of these campaigns, especially where it concerns, going after people who are suspected to be undocumented migrants, asking them to present documentation, going into people's houses that are suspected of being drug lords, that in and of itself is problematic. But there doesn't seem to be a lot being said about it, at least not from the perspective of the authorities.
So again, I think in South Africa we have a long history, as Stanley points out, of solving our differences and thinking of contestation as conflict. The incendiary rhetoric around the campaigns around foreigners and people identify foreign nationals, as well as the performative aspect of some components of these, protests, the carrying of weapons, for example, are meant to be